Life without mercy. Children and teen inmates before 1900. Some of the darkest crimes in American history didn't happen on the streets. They happened behind prison walls to children. What you are about to hear is real, forgotten, and disturbing. Subscribe now, because stories like this were buried on purpose, and we uncover them. The cell door slammed shut with a sound so loud it shook the stone walls. Inside the dark cell stood a boy no older than 12. His feet barely touched the cold floor. His hands were shaking. Around him were grown men, convicted thieves, killers, and hardened inmates who would survive years behind bars. This was not a nightmare. This was real America in the late 1800s. Children were locked inside adult prisons, and once the door closed, mercy did not exist. What happened to this boy next would haunt prison records for decades. That boy was not alone. Across the United States, thousands of children were sent to adult jails for crimes as small as stealing bread or skipping school. There were no youth courts, no child protection. Judges believed fear would fix children. Prison officials believed pain would teach lessons, and society looked away. In places like New York, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts, boys as young as 7 were arrested and placed in cells meant for men. Girls were not spared either. Some were jailed for being homeless or accused of bad behavior. Inside, children were forced into silence, hard labor, and endless fear. Many were beaten by guards. Others were harmed by inmates who were never meant to share space with a child. Most suffered in silence, knowing no one was coming to save them. The shocking truth is that this system was legal. Court records from the 1800s show children sentenced to years behind bars with no chance of appeal. One well-known case from 1825 involved an 8-year-old boy named James Leisure, jailed in New York State Prison. By the late 1800s, cases like his were still happening. Reformers warned that prisons were destroying young minds, but their voices were ignored. Some children did not survive. Prison logs quietly listed deaths as illness or accident. Families were rarely told the truth. Others survived but left broken, unable to read, unable to trust, and unable to escape the shadow of prison life. These children did not grow up. They hardened too early. Public anger slowly began to rise when journalists exposed what was happening behind prison walls. Stories leaked of children chained, whipped, and locked in dark cells for days. One report described a boy crying through the night until his voice went silent. That report would change everything, but not before more children were lost to the system. And just as the nation began to question this cruelty, one shocking prison incident involving a teenage inmate forced America to finally look inside its darkest cells, and what was discovered there would shake the justice system to its core. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we step inside that prison, and what happened to that child inmate would spark a movement that changed American history forever. The shouting stopped first. Then came the sound of running boots. When guards reached the cell block, a teenage boy lay on the cold floor, barely moving. He was 15 years old. He had been sent to prison for stealing a coat. Now, grown men stood back against the walls, silent. The prison report would later say there was an incident. It would not say that this moment finally forced the public to see what prisons were doing to children. This happened again and again across America in the late 1800s. In places like Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania and Sing Sing in New York, teenagers were mixed with adult inmates as if age did not matter. Once inside, rules were harsh and punishment came fast. Talking could lead to beatings. Mistakes could lead to isolation. For a child, prison was not correction, it was survival. Many children entered prison already scared and confused. Most came from poor families. Some had no parents at all. Courts did not ask why a child stole food or slept on the street. Judges only asked what law was broken. The sentence was the same as an adult's, years behind bars, no mercy. One real case shocked reformers in the 1900s. A 13-year-old boy was sent to an adult prison in New York for burglary. He could not read or write. Within months, prison doctors noted his behavior had changed. He stopped speaking. He refused food. He stared at walls for hours. Officials called him uncooperative. Today, we would call it trauma. Back then, he was punished harder. Girls suffered too. Teenage girls were jailed for things like running away or being labeled troubled. Inside women's prisons, conditions were just as cruel. Some were forced into labor from sunrise to nightfall. Others were locked away from all human contact. Their youth did not protect them. It made them easier to control. Outside prison walls, most Americans had no idea this was happening. Prisons were closed worlds. Guards controlled the stories. Deaths were hidden behind simple words like fever or weakness. Families were told their children were being corrected. In truth, many children left prison worse than when they entered or never left at all. Then something changed. Journalists began asking questions. Social reformers demanded access to prisons. One group in Massachusetts documented case after case of children locked in adult cells. Their reports described small bodies in heavy chains, children working alongside violent offenders, teenagers learning crime instead of escaping it. Public meetings followed. Parents stood up and spoke. Former inmates told their stories. One man described being sent to prison at 11 and leaving at 20 with no education, no family, and no future. His words spread through newspapers, stirring anger and shame across the country. Slowly, the idea took hold that children should not be treated like adults. Reformers argued that prisons were creating criminals, not stopping them. They pushed for separate courts, separate facilities, and a new way of thinking about youth and crime. But the prison system fought back. Wardens claimed separation was too expensive. Lawmakers hesitated. Change moved painfully slow. Then came the case that could not be ignored. A teenage inmate died while serving time meant for men twice his age. The details leaked. The age, the sentence, the conditions. This time, the public listened. Protests followed. Editorials demanded answers. Politicians were forced to respond. That death became a turning point. Within a few years, the first juvenile courts began to appear. Separate reform schools replaced adult cells, though many were still harsh. The idea of childhood, once ignored by the justice system, finally began to matter. But reform did not erase the damage already done. Thousands of former child inmates carried prison scars for life. Some became repeat offenders. Others disappeared into poverty and silence. Their stories were never written down. Their pain was never repaired. And just when America believed it had fixed the problem, records revealed something disturbing. Children were still being punished in secret, under new names, in places that claimed to be safe. In the next chapter, we uncover what those new institutions really were, and why, for many children, mercy was still missing. The building looked kinder than a prison. There were windows, there was a yard. Some even had classrooms. They were called reform schools, industrial schools, or training schools. To the public, they sounded like places meant to save children. But for many boys and girls sent there before 1900, the suffering did not end. It simply changed shape.
One boy, aged 14, was sent to a reform school in Illinois after being caught stealing coal to heat his home. Newspapers described the place as progressive. Inside, the doors still locked. Children were still beaten. Silence was still enforced. If a child disobeyed, punishment came fast. Whippings, isolation rooms, forced labor from sunrise to nightfall. The word reform did not mean mercy. These schools were filled with children taken from adult prisons, but the mindset followed them. Many staff members were former guards. Discipline mattered more than care. Records from the New York House of Refuge show children as young as 9 placed in solitary confinement for days. Some were locked in dark rooms with nothing but bread and water. Officials believed breaking a child's spirit would fix their behavior. Deaths still happened. They were just harder to see. When a child died, reports blamed sickness or weakness. Families were rarely allowed inside. Many never knew what truly happened. In one documented case from the 1890s, a teenage boy collapsed during forced labor and never stood up again. His death was recorded without investigation. The system moved on. Not all children accepted this quietly. Some ran away, others fought back. Escapes were common, and when children were caught, punishment doubled. Chains returned, beatings worsened. The message was clear: obedience or pain. Childhood was not considered a reason for mercy. Yet voices outside grew louder. Reformers who once pushed for separation now demanded real protection. Journalists published survivor accounts. One former inmate described being sent to prison at 10, moved to a reform school at 12, and released at 18 with no family and no future. "They taught me fear," he said, "not how to live." By the late 1890s, pressure reached lawmakers. The idea of juvenile courts gained support. In 1899, Illinois opened the first official juvenile court in the United States. For the first time, the law admitted children were different from adults. Judges were told to look at a child's life, not just their crime. But change did not reach everyone. Many states were slow to follow. Rural areas continued sending children to adult jails. Reform schools remained harsh. Some children fell through the cracks completely, too young for prison, too poor for protection. The damage lasted long after release. Former child inmates struggled to find work. Many could not read. Many carried fear into adulthood. Studies later showed a painful truth. Children raised in punishment often returned to crime, not because they were bad, but because prison was the only world they knew. America eventually learned a hard lesson. Treating children like criminals created criminals. Punishment without mercy destroyed lives before they had begun. The prison system of the 1800s left behind a generation of broken youth whose stories were buried in court files and forgotten records. Today, juvenile justice exists because of them, because of the boys and girls locked in cells meant for men, because of children who cried behind stone walls and were never heard. Their suffering forced change, but it came too late for many. And even now, one question remains: how many stories were never told, and how many children were lost before the world finally decided they mattered? If this chapter moved you, stay with the story. What comes next will reveal how echoes of this past still shape justice today, and why remembering these children matters more than ever. The iron door closed again, this time in the new century. The boy inside was small, frightened, and officially labeled a ward of the state. On paper, he was no longer in a prison. He was in a place meant to help him. But as the lock clicked into place, the fear in his eyes looked the same as the children before him. The system had changed its name, not its nature, and what happened next would prove that mercy was still fragile. After the first juvenile courts opened in 1899, many Americans believed the nightmare was over. Newspapers praised progress. Politicians spoke of hope. Children, they said, would finally be protected. But behind the walls of many reform schools, old habits refused to die. Guards still believed in fear. Discipline still came before care. And children were still paying the price. In several states, children were sent to reform schools without trials. Judges decided their fate in minutes. Some weren't even accused of crimes. Being poor, homeless, or unruly was enough. Once inside, children followed strict schedules. Wake up before sunrise, work all day, silence at night. Any mistake brought punishment. One real investigation in the early 1900s uncovered shocking conditions inside a Midwestern reform school. Boys were forced to march for hours. Food was withheld as punishment. Beatings were common, but hidden. When a child collapsed from exhaustion, staff blamed weakness, not abuse. The public was stunned. They had been told these places were safe.
Girls faced quiet suffering. Many were sent away for reasons no longer considered crimes: running away, disobeying parents, being at risk. Inside, they worked long hours sewing or cleaning. Some were locked away alone for weeks. Their voices were rarely heard outside the walls. Former child inmates began to speak out as adults. Their stories shared the same pattern. Fear replaced childhood. Pain replaced learning. Trust disappeared. Many said they left institutions angry and lost, unprepared for the world they were sent back into. Slowly, reform deepened. Rules were written. Inspections began. Some schools improved, others closed. The idea of protecting children gained strength, but it took decades. For many, help came too late. The truth is painful. America learned how not to treat children by first doing it wrong. The suffering of child inmates before 1900 built the foundation of modern juvenile justice. Every law, every safeguard was written in response to lives already damaged. But history does not stay buried. Even today, debates continue about punishment, age, and responsibility. The past whispers a warning. When mercy is removed, children break. And when children break, society pays the price. The children of the 1800s had no voice, no choice, no mercy. Their stories remind us that justice must protect the most vulnerable, or it becomes another kind of prison. And as we look at the systems we trust today, one question still echoes from those stone walls. Have we truly learned, or are we repeating the past in new ways? The file was thin, just a name, an age, and a short note written in faded ink. Released. No explanation, no follow-up. For thousands of children who passed through prisons and reform schools before 1900, this was how their stories ended on paper. Not with justice, not with healing, just silence. But what happened after those doors opened was often just as painful as what happened inside. Many children were released with nothing. No money, no education, no family waiting. A boy who entered prison at 10 might leave at 18 knowing only rules, fear, and punishment. The outside world felt strange and unsafe. Some tried to work but were turned away when people learned where they had been. Others drifted back to the streets, where prison life had already taught them how to survive the hard way. Real records from the late 1800s showed a pattern that scared reformers. Former child inmates were more likely to be arrested again, not because they were born bad, but because prison had shaped them. Violence felt normal, authority felt dangerous, trust felt impossible. The system claimed to correct them, yet it sent them back broken. One former inmate from New York spoke years later about his childhood behind bars. He said the prison taught him 3 things: how to stay quiet, how to fight, and how to never expect kindness. He was sent in for stealing food. He came out angry, alone, and ready to return to crime. His story was not rare, it was common. Some children disappeared completely. No records, no families searching. Reformers believed many died young, worn down by years of fear and hard labor. Others were swallowed by poverty. Their lives never made it into history books. Only prison walls remembered them. By the early 1900s, laws began to change more clearly. Juvenile courts expanded. Child labor laws followed. Education became a right. Slowly, society accepted a truth that should have been obvious all along. Children needed care, not cages. But progress was uneven.
Some states moved fast, others resisted. The scars remained. Even as adults, former child inmates struggled. Nightmares, anger, silence. Many could not explain their pain. In their time, no one called it trauma. They were simply labeled difficult, broken, or lost.
Historians now look back and see the cost. Every reform came after suffering. Every protection was written because a child had already been hurt. The justice system learned by failing its youngest prisoners first. Today, their stories matter more than ever. When society debates punishment, age, and responsibility, the past stands as a warning. When children are treated without mercy, the damage spreads far beyond prison walls. The children of the 1800s did not choose their fate. They were shaped by fear in a system that did not see them as children at all. Remembering them is not about guilt, it is about truth. Because once you understand what happens when mercy is taken away from a child, you can never look at justice the same way again. The last prison ledger closed without a sound. No crowd, no apology. Just dust settling on shelves filled with names of children who grew up behind bars before the world decided they were worth saving. By the time America truly admitted what it had done, most of those children were already gone, lost to poverty, crime, illness, or quiet lives shaped by fear. Their childhoods ended long before they ever reached adulthood. What history finally revealed was simple and painful. Children were never too dangerous to protect. They were simply too powerless to matter. In the 1800s, the justice system did not ask who a child was or why they failed. It only asked how to punish them. And punishment came fast. Cells were small, rules were cruel, mercy was rare. Records from the late 19th century showed that many adults filling prisons later in life had first entered jail as children. Reformers recognized the pattern too late. Prison did not stop crime for children, it trained it. Fear became normal, violence became a language, trust disappeared. When these children were released, society blamed them for the damage it had caused. By the early 1900s, juvenile courts and child protections expanded, but the memory of those early child inmates faded quickly. Their names were not taught in schools, their names were not honored. Progress moved forward, but remembrance did not. The nation preferred to celebrate reform rather than face the suffering that forced it to happen. Yet the past never fully leaves. Modern debates about punishment, detention, and youth responsibility still echo the same questions asked over 100 years ago. How young is too young? How harsh is too harsh? And whether fear truly creates safety? The answers are written in those old prison records, if anyone is willing to read them. The children of the 1800s taught America a lesson written in pain. When a system forgets mercy, it creates harm that lasts generations. When children are treated as criminals instead of children, the damage does not end at the prison gate. It spreads into families, into communities, into the future. These boys and girls had no voice then. They could not tell their stories. They could not demand change. All they could do was endure. And because they endured, others were spared the same fate later on. Their lives remind us of a truth that should never be ignored. Justice without mercy is not justice at all. And a society is measured not by how it punishes its weakest, but by how it protects them. This is where the story ends, but the warning remains. Because every time a child stands alone before a system that chooses punishment over care, the past is watching. And it is waiting to see if we remember. These children had no voice when it happened, but remembering them gives them one now. If this story made you feel something, don't look away. Subscribe for more real, hidden, true crime stories history tried to erase.